Are you as an employer going to pay your employees the same amount of time or less time because they're going to be working faster, right? And then also the fabrics of the 8-hour workday, that came in from the 1800 era during the manufacturing phase. We go back in time in history. So here's a bigger question. Are we going to be working 8-hour days in the next 20, 50, 100 years from now? Are we going back to the Industrial Revolution? Are we embracing a new way of life?
G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm your host, Rob Malicki, coming to you today from Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Bosco Anthony, who's the Chief Brand Officer for Global RevGen and made a real icon around the international ed. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's been a great few years. I've got my roots at the Gold Coast Conference. I think that's where we actually met.
I think so.
Yeah, and it's been a great, amazing journey so far. But yeah, happy to be here.
It's great to have you here, mate, because you're one of these people in the industry. You've got such a presence. You've got this kind of calm confidence. Whether you're on stage, whether you're standing at your booth and talking with people, I just love following it. But you're actually a TEDx speaker.
Yes.
So that must have required quite a bit of confidence. Tell me, let me start off there. Tell me the story about becoming a TEDx speaker.
Well, look, I think let's start off with the actual calling to become a TEDx speaker. So I started speaking when I was 21 years old. I worked for an online marketing firm in the U.S. just after 9/11. And it was a really interesting time to travel into the U.S., as you probably know. And I kept getting these two things coming at me. And it was almost like the universe was asking me to show up in these two spaces. But there was two questions I kept getting asked, which is, mate, have you written a book? And the other one is, have you ever done a TED Talk? And I had no idea what this was. But at the time, doing a TEDx or a TED Talk was sort of like winning an Oscar if you're an actor. It was sort of permission to be at a higher stage. And so I went through the process of trying to find something. And eventually I was applying for a TEDx chapter, TEDx Stanley Park, which was in the Queen Elizabeth Theatre in Vancouver. And there was over 100 applicants from around the world. And they only selected 15.
Wow.
And so I ended up making the cut, but I ended up being number 16 and I was a reserve speaker. And it was painful, man. It was so painful. It was like a 30-hour application process. And there was, the ego kicked in. And I remember my mentor at the time who, rest his soul, he's passed now. But he said to me, look, Bosco, you're guaranteed to speak whether it's this year or next year. So even if you're a backup speaker, eat the humble pie and just do it. And then 3 months into the application process, we were starting to prepare. And I had to prepare even though I was a backup speaker. And I got an email that said, number 15 has pulled out. You're now number 15.
Yeah.
And it's just, a lesson in being very humble in life. And I had 3 months to prep. I had 4 coaches. I had probably about 380 hours of preparation. It was probably the most intense, rigorous training I ever had, especially when you have 4 coaches that had different directives. How do you keep everyone happy? And, the process was really gruesome. I would practice every morning in the shower, every night in the shower. I learned a lot about, audience engagement, body tonality, positioning, pausing, and something didn't feel right through the 3-month process because I had a very powerful story about my time in Africa and I needed to tell it a certain way. And unfortunately, the coaches felt it was too graphic. And so I was struggling with this particular inner voice that said, you need to tell your story. So I had to pacify these 4 coaches. And then on the day of the conference, 20 minutes before I go up on stage, I tear up the script and rewrite the entire script before I go up on stage. My finished talk today that you see on YouTube, and I'm fortunate to have over 1 million views, was an improvised speech done by the heart in the last 20 minutes. It was probably the best decision I ever made. I trusted my gut, and I ended up being fortunate to walk away with a standing ovation in front of 2,000 people. And the topic was about how to live life with purpose, nothing to do with what I do for work, but it then set the backstory for my career. It shaped me to move around the world. I discovered Australia. I've now lived in Tanzania, in Vancouver, Canada, and now I call, Australia home.
Can you give me the guts of the story? So what we'll do is we'll drop it in the show notes. We'll drop a link to the TED Talk online. But because it sounds fascinating.
Yeah, look, I did some online research and I discovered that, just as pre-COVID in 2016, people were starting to question their purpose in life. There's a lot of people that were settling in their work roles. So I kept seeing online trends and, I'm a marketing futurist. So I was able to look at Google data and I kept seeing trends about how to live life with purpose and how to discover your purpose. And I was fortunate that my mentor, David Reeve, the late David Reeve, wrote a book on how to, discover your purpose. And he actually helped me discover my purpose in life. So David basically, allowed me to discover my personal purpose, which is to leave people better than I found them. And my professional purpose is really to empower the brands that I work with and then leave them better than I found them. So, when I discovered my purpose at a very young age, it allowed me to really progress in my career. And so I wanted to give a talk to address people, no matter what walk of life you came from, whether you had an extreme or harsh upbringing or you had a sheltered life. It would give you the power to use certain tools, to use introspection and reflection to really work on articulating your purpose and understanding these key values. And so this was 18 minutes that changed my entire life. It was the biggest rush I've ever had. It was one of those defining moments. And I remember, I think finishing up my talk with the Bob Marley quote, and I think I made a gesture for one love, and the crowd, responded and gave me some love on stage. And that feeling is like winning an Oscar.
I can still see it in your eyes, mate. Your eyes are twinkling like crazy. It's like you're back in that moment.
Yes.
When the crowd's getting to their feet and they're, Bosco.
Yeah. Look, the backstory is this. I also lost 100 pounds, which is 50 kilos. Wow. Yeah, so heavy Bosco looked very different to what I am today. So there was a lot of life changes. I was going through a lot of life changes at the time. I was going through some health changes, making some good decisions about my career. So it was it was one of those milestone years that led to, through a ripple effect, of series of other years as well, then eventually brought me to Australia.
Mate, where's the confidence come from?
The confidence isn't something that you get. I think you earn confidence, you embrace it, you have to let go of fear to embrace confidence, and you've got to create room for it. It's something that comes with time, experience, and also the people that you're around, right? I think confidence can be nurtured. People can embrace it. And I was happy to have some really fortunate mentors that really just embraced my crazy ideas and said, we believe in you, and I think the power of affirmation and the power of belief, it really rocket fuels confidence. So, the speaking allowed me to then do workshops. COVID hit when I moved to Australia and I had to do digital workshops. There was a moment when there was no conferences. I'm fortunate to have spoken at over 1,000 different conferences around the world, which is, it's like a masterclass at that point where you've put in your 10,000 hours, and people don't realize when you're speaking, it's not just that 20-minute keynote or that hour on stage. There's the extended travel, there's the bureaucracy at the borders, it's the harassment, it's the checking of your passport, it's the packing, it's the flight delays. I could go on for hours. And then, when you do a keynote for the first time, when I did the keynote on the Gold Coast, that was 40 hours of research to put up. So people get to see a finished product, but speaking is a way of life.
Yeah, and you make it look easy, right? When you're prepped and people go, wow, you're so good at that. And you're like, yes, because I worked my butt off to actually get it there.
Yeah. And look, it's years of practice. And even today, as much as people go, you're a master of your craft, I'm actually a student of the game. So I actually study ways to present and uplift my game. I'm always looking at other ways to engage. You and I actually did a conference recently on the Gold Coast. And even though I knew what I knew and I delivered what I needed to deliver, I still picked up on different ways of engaging the audience from other speakers.
Yeah.
I still was able to take those micro bits, right? And being a great speaker is about putting the ego aside and being open to everybody's perspective.
Do you remember the first time where you were like, I've got this? Right, most of us have that kind of moment where suddenly, whether it's like, you suddenly go, oh man, I'm confident at this, I'm good at this, and you suddenly own it. Do you remember yours?
Yeah, look, so it's funny because most people will hit a certain accolade like a TED Talk to know that this is what they want to do. For me, it was the first time I ever spoke on stage, which was an accidental route. So I was in Edmonton and the speaker had food poisoning, which is basically one of the most famous things you could ever get on the road. Bad scrambled egg, actually. And anyways, so we had 300 attendees, and when we had those 300 attendees, we had to make a choice. Either we cancel the event, refund all the tickets, or someone had to go up. And I was the guy in the room selling these packages at the time. I was just, a very young age. And I said, look, guys, I'm not a speaker, but I know the PowerPoint like the back of my hand. I've seen it, over 40 times. And I said, I'm happy to give it a shot. No idea about speaking at this point, never done it before. And I went up on stage and within 15 seconds, a light bulb turned on. It was that power of having to influence a message, being in front of people, entertaining the audience. And I think that first laughter, that first commonality, that shared experience where you can relate to someone on a human level, that is acceptance, and acceptance is fuel. And so for me, that was the first time when I said to myself, I think I've discovered a layer of my purpose. And I realized living in Africa and living around the world and everything else that we all have a story to tell. We all have a message to tell. And sometimes your circumstances prevent you from actually telling your story. And that's really what this speaking opportunity empowered me to do. It allowed me to really bring a message to life. And I'm fortunate now that I get to apply it in my career, even at this stage in my life, where I talk about perspectives in the education sector at conferences like AIEC. And, what a time to be carrying messages and perspectives, because it's such a sensitive period in history.
Yeah, it totally is. Could we go down the storytelling route for a moment? Because you tell a great story, So for those people listening along or watching, just before we started recording, we were sort of talking, okay, where do we start the podcast?
Yeah.
And I can see your brain ticking over, being like, going through like that mental Rolodex of stories. What to you makes a great story?
Sentiments and emotion. So I always start with the end in mind. It is, what is it that you're trying to portray? What is it that you're trying to give out to the world? And one of the best advice as a storyteller was something that I learned at a very young age, which is everybody's favorite radio channel is WIFM, which is what's in it for me. Right? Everyone is looking for something. Everyone's looking for that nirvana, right? It could be an insight. It could be a output. It could be a takeaway, right? Some people are just looking to be distracted. Some people are looking for emotion and laughter. So I went out to a few conferences to see a few speakers when I first got in the game. And one of my mentors said, just absorb and listen. And I was like, mate, I'm being to these really terrible speakers that are just using outdated PowerPoints. And he said, every good and bad talk is an opportunity for you to listen. It was the most powerful advice I ever learned. And then one day I ran across, after 30 speakers, this futuristic speaker that had learned how to embed videos into his PowerPoints. And he wasn't using Wi-Fi. He had found a way to extract it off of YouTube and put it into PowerPoint. And I looked at the room. This is when cell phones were just starting to come out. Remember those old school iPods and iPhones, that time?
100%.
Yeah, that era. And I remember there was this moment where everyone was looking at him and I was looking at everyone in the room. And there was a moment when everyone had stopped looking at their phone and started looking at the speaker. And I said, you know what? That is the it factor. That is the emotion that I want to become and that carry. And I wanted to be that visual storyteller. So over time, I learned that you can tell a story, but you have to give people emotion. You have to give them a memory. And so I learned the art of storytelling through waves of emotions. And if you've ever seen a keynote of mine, there's a little bit of laughter, there's a little bit of inspiration, there's a little bit of fear, there's a little bit of just God shock, or that sort of after effect. There's the shock and awe moments as well. And then there's a little bit of, emotion, sentiment. Some people have cried during my keynote. Some people have found it very emotional. And if you can make someone feel in that 20 to 60 minutes of time, then you are embodying the elements of storytelling. And, storytelling is a gift. People look at speakers and there's this privilege or sense of entitlement, and people have a message and they're trying to sell something or tell a story on stage. I look at it and go, you're blessed with the gift of time, and how you use that time is the most important thing that you can ever do when you're on stage. So I always try to put myself in the perspective of the audience and go, what are they going through and what can I give them that they haven't seen before that's going to make them remember you? And so I live in an age now where artificial intelligence, immersive reality, and robotics is a big topic in the education sector. And not just the education sector, but other sectors as well, and across 17 other sectors. And I get to bring those stories to life. And it's so cool to see, through visuals and robotics, an audience that's uncomfortable. Some are embracing it, and some people are shocked, and some people are scared. And that's the art of a true storyteller.
And what I love is that not only are you doing this passion for story, which is just coming out, as you're talking, I can see it in you, right?
Yeah.
But then that's also what you do for work, right? Like brand is story, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, when I came to GRG, it's been a company that's been in business now for 15 years. We didn't tell our story 3 years ago. We were known for our story because the clients that we worked with knew we did a really good job. We had 3 founders that were well known and respected in the industry, but we weren't at the top of the mountain, beating our chests going, we are GRG. We just were this hidden industry secret that went, oh, you just go to GRG if you need international media buying. And I started to look at the stories and the campaigns and the frontiers we were crossing. We're starting to dabble in AI, and we were a world's first AI company that was providing creative intelligence before you started media buying. And I'm sitting here going, I'm sitting on a wealth of knowledge, experience, and story that we weren't telling at the time. And so it became a challenge for me to bring that story to life. And, it's been an amazing journey. 2 years of just incredible features and highlights and milestones. And the company has grown as a result. We're growing our people, we're growing our services, we've crossed a lot of boundaries. We're now doing marketing not just in Australia, but in other countries as well as Australian institutions in India, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So, especially with the current times with the visa caps, a lot of universities are having an international focus and a diversification strategy, and we're part of that. So, it's the most powerful thing is telling your story. And storytelling isn't a list of services and products. Storytelling isn't features and benefits or value proposition or unique selling points. Storytelling is how do you make people feel?
Where's your favorite place in the world? Little left turn, but just when you talk about feel,
yeah,
my brain goes traveling, goes off amongst the clouds.
100%.
Where's the place that you feel the most, where you're just alive?
Yeah, look, it's funny because I was raised as a traditional Catholic, and I call myself a recovering Catholic, but I'm more spiritual as time has come along. And I'm a believer that I've probably lived a previous life. I've come to life at the Colosseum. I've come to life at Machu Picchu. I'm in love with history. If I wasn't doing marketing, I'd be an archaeologist because I love dead things. So I love to go to archaeological places. I'd love to go to Jordan, and see the gate that was in Indiana Jones as well. But I come to life into places that is untouched or parts unknown. One of my biggest people that bring me a lot of inspiration is Anthony Bourdain, the late Anthony Bourdain. So for me, going to places like Maui, I've been to Maui 7 times. Going to places that are inhabited or places that are untouched or going back in time is where I get my biggest inspiration. It's where I get my biggest source of fuel, because for a minute there or for a few moments, I get to stop thinking. I get to disconnect. I get to put the phone away, and I just get to live and get to be human for a change. And it's probably the place that I go to restore myself as well.
History's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, you think about when you're off in some destination and you're walking on, maybe come across a gravestone and you see this name that's written down, and you think about how many stories that one individual in their 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, everything that they lived, and all it gets reduced down to is like this little glimpse there, and then suddenly, I don't know, to me, maybe you feel the same. It's like suddenly your brain is just like, oh my God, I wonder what that person's life was like and everything.
Absolutely. Look, you can find a lot of answers going back in the past, and there's an old saying that says, just when you think you know the answers, the questions change, right? I find a lot of new answers and new questions that come to life when I go back in time. Right now we're having an emergence of the future of work, for example. And we're talking about what does the future of work look like, especially with the emergence of AI. Well, Rob, no one's asking the question of, okay, if AI is supposed to make us more superhuman and reduce our time, are you as an employer going to pay your employees the same amount of time or less time because they're going to be working faster, right? And then also the fabrics of the 8-hour workday, that came in from the 1800 era during the manufacturing phase. We go back in time in history. So here's a bigger question. Are we going to be working 8-hour days in the next 20, 50, 100 years from now? Are we going back to the Industrial Revolution? Are we embracing a new way of life? So there's a lot of unanswered questions, and there's a lot of new answers that are coming to life because of history. And we're at the forefront of creating new history, because what we do today as a generation is now impacting the next few generations that are coming in. And it's not just in a future of work perspective, but think about education and migration and the future of global mobilization and movement. We're at the forefront of making some key decisions that is going to impact the sector in all facets.
Do you think we're equipped to be making those decisions right now?
I think we need to apply a lot of care. I think we need to apply a lot of perspectives, and we need to have a lot more conversations. I'll give you a great example. I moved to Brisbane just at the end of 2018, and there was lockdown. I couldn't leave the country. I couldn't go back to see my folks in Canada. So I was locked in, and I had to make Brisbane home. And there was a moment in time when all the temporary workers were asked to leave Australia, right? Now, think about the ripple effect. All of a sudden, you have rotting fruits in the farms. You have no fruits at the stores. And the Australians were like, well, why aren't people working? And we were like, well, you sent the people out. And they were like, well, why aren't Australians picking fruit in farms? And you go, how many Australians do you know that are actually picking fruit in farms? Right? Now, think about the person who made that policy. Think about the decision making about, trying to prevent the increase of COVID, and then making that blanket decision, but not thinking about the impact. Right? If you think about today's policy, Australian Financial Review just talked about what Canada is reporting right now as far as losses as a result of the first year of the international caps implemented in Canada, right? We know what the numbers are telling us. We're already seeing these projected anticipated losses, but we're also seeing the rise of microeconomies. We're seeing New Zealand take advantage of Australia's current challenges. We're seeing more secondary countries in Europe. I get to look at this data through the AI software, and we're seeing Turkey, Macedonia, we're seeing Germany, we're seeing other countries, Japan, China, all now becoming other options in the destination play. And we're even seeing, places in the UK where we're seeing marketing packages with free accommodation packages for your education because of Australia's shortages in accommodation. I'll reverse the question. Do you feel that the decisions we're making today have been really completely thought about?
No. I can answer that really quickly.
Which is why we're all here. We're all here to discuss the economic impact. And it's not, it's not just going to see one area. I have taken probably 2,000 Uber rides in the last 3 years because I travel for a living, and we have clients all over Australia. Most of those drivers are international students. Right. So, there's so many ways international students that I'm an immigrant. I own 2 houses. I pay my taxes. I have 4 businesses today. I'm a proud citizen of Australia that believes in contributing to the economy. So, that one size fits all approach isn't necessarily the best answer today.
Yeah, it's almost dangerous, isn't it? Anytime where you kind of reduce down to the lowest common denominator, sound grabs, and you're trying to make political arguments in a sentence, I don't know, it's just a recipe for bad news. And to some extent, like coming back to your AI thing, I kind of feel like AI and the way it's going to impact society is almost the same. It's, you're a futurist, you're a forward thinker.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated in this space. I'm reading the research. I'm seeing what's going on, what's coming. And even I'm struggling to sort of think about where things, or to imagine just how vast things are going to be, vastly different they might be in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, and look, the problem is that we have an ethical responsibility as storytellers and media, people as well, to tell the right story. And, if you want to look no further into bad publicity, just see what's happening in the U.S. right now and what's happening in the world, right? You get these one-sided narratives of biased, news, and ethical journalism is something that is almost like the postcard. It's the way of the past, right? And so we have a really key responsibility to have the right conversations, the right considerations, and welcome diverse thinking. That's the role of responsibility that doesn't happen once a year at a conference. It's every day, and everyone has to play a role. My perspective is a supplier to the institutions. Your perspective is a storyteller and a supplier to the institutions. And then you have 7 different complexities. I'm here to talk about the 7 different layers of how you position your institution to the globe today. And all of those layers cannot be siloed. They all need to be connected, and people need to come together. So, in order for this to happen, there's a lot of change management that needs to happen. But it's not just policy. We have to look at technology. We have to look at the user experience. We have to look at the demand of tomorrow's generation. And, no one's really embraced the fact that Generation Alpha is a very different generation to the generation of you and I. Today the kids want to have 3 side hustles. They don't want to be dictated by one full-time job. They don't want to be working 5 days a week. They want to be able to experience life. And it's an employee's market, not an employer's market for a little bit as well. And so there's a lot of conversation around that future of workspace. And I think we're just scratching the surface, Rob.
As you were talking, I was thinking about an example that I just read in the paper from the UK, the banking sector, where, bankers, particularly when you're in your 20s, you're expected to be working that 6-7 days a week.
Correct.
You're tapping out 80 to 100 hours.
Yeah.
And people are just walking away being like, no way.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. They're definitely saying that because, they're sitting there going, burnout is a topic of currency today. Mental wellness is a topic of currency today. And believing in sustainable workforces is a topic of currency today. And also the currency of kindness. We're moving towards even wanting more, especially in a world that is fused with innovation and robotics. Our human voice is going to play a really important part in the future. And I'll give you a great example, a real life example. So a few months ago, our chief product officer discovered that AI hallucinates. And what we learned is that if you can feed AI machine learning guided rails, but if it doesn't have that information, it starts to create its own information. And we saw some media debacles like Sora, where it almost tried to rewrite history when we looked at the World War II scenario, and there was a picture of an African American in a Nazi uniform, and the world went into this whole kerfuffle about it. Google had to change their algorithm and change it from woke culture to what it really is. And that was a lesson that basically taught us that even AI needs a mother, not a master. It needs a mother that's going to teach it, fuel it, enable it, empower it as well. And so we had to learn how to create some human components and humans in the loop to ensure we were getting the right quality, the right intelligence, and vetting that human process. Now, AI is learning faster than it's ever before. The scary part is it's moving from mathematical formulas and numbers to human behavior. I have tools today that sign off in my signature and language and tone of voice. It's studying my tonality and my ways of thinking. And the work that the AI has done today and prompted today is a lot bigger, faster, quicker than what it was 10 years ago and where it's going at the future. So I feel like now more than ever before, we have a bigger role to play as humans, because if we are not careful in how we embrace it, teach it, and fuel it, then we could rewrite history and completely replace our voice.
But what about for the storytellers like you and me, for the creatives?
Yeah.
What do you think is coming at us?
Yeah, look, I think for the storytellers like us, we have to embrace fear. And we have to change our way of thinking. So, when I came to GRG and discovered Quant Plus, I realized I was the first human to actually really believe in the product and bring it to the stage, because I looked at it and went, what happens if we couldn't fail? That was the question I asked myself. What would happen if I couldn't fail? What would happen if I embraced technology? What would happen if I lived and breathed it, not just spoke about it on stage? And the results were game-changing. I work 12-hour days. I travel. I'm in 4 different companies. And so time is my most valuable currency. So I've learned how to improve my time inputs and efficiencies using it. I don't live and breathe it. I don't depend on it, but I also work with it. So curiosity really allows you to then leverage those insights. So believe it or not, with Quant, we don't stifle creativity or limit it. We just give the creators and the storytellers a guide rail for them to then put their creative footprint and DNA into that storytelling output. So, great example, we did a campaign for Study Melbourne recently, generated in 1 month over 600 million impressions, 200,000 call to actions. We looked at everything, market research, data from different entities, including Quant, and we were able to shape over 2,000 creatives and images and videos. And it's a proud moment for me to see these campaigns. We spent 3 days in 21 locations bringing these stories to life. We didn't limit our creativity. We just empowered it.
That's so true, isn't it? Because, you're letting the audience decide, right? Like, you're a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. You get that up on stage, you write an article on LinkedIn, and you might feel good about the product. But if the audience
That's right.
doesn't give a rat's about it,
absolutely.
then is that a good piece of content?
Yeah, look, I'm a mad scientist in a lab, so I love to split test. I love to try different creatives. And so with all our clients, we are fortunate enough where they trust us to go, hey, let's try different things. And I love finding out, that discovery piece for me is the most valuable insight. And sometimes you have a hunch because of experience. I'll give you a great example. We had a university that wanted to embed their call to action form at the bottom of their page. And we said, you're going to lose a bit of your traffic. Your stats are telling us that at least there's a 70% drop off if your call to action form is not at the top of the page. And so we put a heat map, and the data said that there was a 70% drop off. I knew about it before we actually did it, but data came to life. So split testing is probably the most important thing in marketing and storytelling.
Yeah, it's like that magical nexus between the quant and the qual.
That's right.
Where you've got to play between the two if you really want to deliver.
Absolutely, Rob.
So let's go to the curiosity, because
Yes.
this is something that jumps out as me. As you're talking, like, you're so curious. Do you remember a time when when you were young and, I don't know, you were burning ants with a magnifying glass, or you were, you were diving into the mud and going for something, like some moment where you were suddenly just like so curious?
Yeah. Look, old movies. So going back in history, right, you find a lot of stories and answers in the past. I watched a lot of the John Wayne flicks. I watched a lot of the 50s and 60s and 70s. I had a dad that loved watching movies on the weekend. So for me, storytelling started at a very young age, and I got lost in time. A great Saturday or Sunday afternoon for me is when I can put the laptop away and watch an old movie. There's a lot about life and humanity that you see in the old classics, And so for me, that curiosity started then, it was trying to figure out who done it, or trying to figure out the plot or the twist, or then what I love is a double plot twist, or seeing something that you didn't see happening, Think about Game of Thrones, where we had a few moments in time where we went, oh my God, this just happened, Your deepest, wildest fantasies all of a sudden hit you in a storytelling narrative. So for me, my inspiration really comes from there, and that curiosity, and that's allowed me to bring that in my workspace. I try to keep an open mind. I rely on experience and skill set, but more importantly, I also rely on the data and the outputs to tell me where to go. And that's why when you're marketing into 55 countries around the world, you can't walk in with a game plan sometimes. Sometimes you have to let the results become the game plan.
Yeah, so true. Once again, like you're talking about understanding the process behind, what makes a great story, what makes great creative. I mean, just thinking back to the first story you told in this conversation around the TED Talk, and how, you introduced this element where you're like, there were 15 places, pause, and I was number 16. And immediately there's tension. And I'm just like, now I know storytelling, I'm just like, Bosco, yes, that was awesome.
You're
magic, right?
And that's the magic, and you're an observer to that as a storyteller. You recognize that, right? Because you see what a good story is, and that doesn't come from practicing. That doesn't come from scripting. Believe it or not, we did this interview with no questions. It was basically just speaking from the heart, right? And that's the beauty about telling the story, is when you have the right recipes and the right mechanics, and you have the right things to work from, you can tell beautiful stories, but it's about embracing it as opposed to fearing it.
For those people listening along, let's try and give something really actionable to sort of, for them to think about when they're trying to, let's say, like working with students, trying to tease out student feedback narrative so that they can do their marketing better.
Correct.
What are a couple of easy, actionable things that anyone could start to drop in?
Look, the biggest discovery I can tell you is you cannot have a one-size-fits-all. So one of the biggest things that I dug a lot deeper into with the AI was many moons ago when we first started testing quant, we realized that Caucasian looks in the reports, because our AI today looks at everything, skin tonality, keywords, backdrops. And so there was a really serious question I had to ask myself, which was, is AI racially profiling looks in international countries? Is AI racist? That was a question I had asked myself, because in a lot of the international countries, AI preferred fair skin tonalities. So I started to dig a lot deeper and started going to those people that were promoting. And what I discovered is that the reason why it favored fair skin tonalities was, at the time, a lot of international departments didn't have a lot of international looks. They were relying on their domestic looks.
Uh-huh.
So now I was like, okay, I'm onto something here. It had nothing to do with the preferences. It's just that they were leaning in on whatever resources they had. Long comes in AI, and more international sectors are growing. And all of a sudden we started split testing and putting an Indian student or a Kenyan student or a Chinese student. And all of a sudden we were getting, if not better, even stronger results. So then I was like, okay, AI is what you feed it and what you fuel it with, right? It's studying patterns and behaviors. So the quickest win is to not have a one-size-fits-all for international marketing. The second quickest win is embracing localization, going where the audience is. So for example, in Vietnam, we use Zalo. In China, we're in Douyin and Weibo and all these other areas. And a lot of the institutions are starting to embrace that presence, because they realize that storytelling is told in different languages and in different formats and in different cultural nuances. And you may be a great Western storyteller, but if you're going down to the other side of the world, you may need to embrace Eastern storytelling methods, and they're different.
it's nice to see that shifting in the world. I just saw that the Nobel
Yeah.
Prize for Literature was just
Yes.
announced. A South Korean
Yeah.
was the recipient who'd been writing in
Right.
Korean. I mean,
That's right.
about time, because there are
That's
great
right.
stories in every language, aren't there?
Yeah, and so I'm a teaser of giving people something different. So, this year I chose not to do a keynote. I chose to do a panel, but we're going to showcase, and no one knows this yet, we're going to be one of the first groups that's going to show a video of a prospective student who's actually speaking with me tomorrow that's talking to a robot. And we're talking about how robotics can help the education sector to help with their generous amount of leads. And when you don't have staff on the weekends or off-peak hours, how do you embrace robotics? No one's talking about that.
Yeah.
But that's where I want to take the story to, the future.
Yeah, and you're always ahead. Hey, last question. I really appreciate you giving me so much of your time at such a busy conference. But if I could give you a ticket, plane ticket, magic ticket, anywhere in the world, straight out of Melbourne, direct, no changes, where would you go to, or where would you go back to, and why?
Great question. Look, where I would go to today for me, I think, would be Zanzibar. It's where my dad was born. Freddie Mercury's old bar, I guess, in Tanzania, East Africa. It's where my roots are, and I would go there to really just get in touch with my roots again. It's a place that's on my list to go back to. I've traveled everywhere around the world, but I haven't been back home in Tanzania since I was 18. I'm 41, so it's been a long time. Before I get to 50, I'd like to go back there. The other place that I would love to go back to is Maui. So Maui got really hit by the fires. It's a place that I would go when I was on vacation in Canada. And I spent a lot of time there as well. And it's really sad to see Lahaina completely wiped out. And so it's going to take some years to restore the economy and the history there as well. And I'd love to go back to really just pay respect to the land, because it's a beautiful place, and that ohana lifestyle and that sort of, way of life in Hawaii is just a beautiful culture that can be introduced in any part of the world.
Bosco Anthony, thanks for joining me on Global Horizons.
Thank you very much, sir.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garigal land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.